Welcome to Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a truth and love ministry podcast designed to help biblical Christians witness to their Mormon friends, family, and missionaries. For more Bible-based resources, check out tilm.org. We have all kinds of resources to support you, including classes, witnessing scenarios, books, and so much more. Visit tilm.org today.
Hi, friends. This is Molly.
And Mark.
Today, we are witnessing Christ from the tabernacle.
And the temple.
So, temples are a big deal in LDS theology. And I think I've even heard you say that temples take the place of the cross. In a lot of my LDS friends' houses, they have pictures of at least one temple. Why are temples such a big deal for Mormons?
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation today, Molly. I've been looking forward to talking about witnessing from or at the temple and using the tabernacle. So yeah, the temple is such an integral part of the LDS plan of salvation. It is important both for the living, but more importantly for the dead. Most of what takes place in an LDS temple isn't for this life or for the living, but it's for the next life and for the dead. And Mormons, as soon as they are 12 years old, start to participate in temple work. And from there on out, it is supposed to be a regular part of their lives. It is sometimes referred to as salvation work or temple work. And it really is that. It's something that they're dedicated to as part of what is necessary for eternal progression.
So what does temple work achieve? Why is that so important?
Yeah, so for themselves individually, because they believe that it was commanded by Christ and is commanded by the church to do temple work, they see it as one of the prerequisites, a commandment that they must fulfill in order to receive exaltation. Many of them, when I speak to them about the temple, have a much more other focus of it, where they're saying, well, I need to do this for a family member or a friend. And that really gets into, well, what goes on in the temple? The first thing that those 12-year-old students are able to participate in is baptisms for the dead. Joseph Smith taught that one must be baptized into the restored church, be a recipient of the restored gospel according to the Book of Mormon. And eventually people must have started asking, well, what about people that died before they had that opportunity? And that's really where baptisms from the dead comes from, is this idea that we can do work for those that have already passed so that they can carry out those required covenants and ordinances.
And aren't marriages done in the temple as well?
Yeah, and so that's so confirmations, that you're confirming your faith, can take place via proxy for someone that's dead, and then weddings do take place for the living and for the dead in the temple. And so the one major part of temple work for the average Mormon that has to do with their own life is being sealed to what's called their forever spouse. And they are not only sealed to their spouse, but they also will be sealed to their children. And this is, according to Joseph Smith, required for this right to be a recipient of exaltation, to be divine in the celestial kingdom, is you had to be sealed for this life and for eternity in the temple. And that's another one where people must have asked, like, well, what about those that never had this opportunity? And now proxy sealings take place in the temple as well.
So is it safe to say that without temples, there's no exaltation? Right? They have to have
the path
temples
to the celestial kingdom goes through the temple. One of the rooms in the temple is called the celestial room. And it's a common phrase that if you are able to go regularly to the celestial room, if you're worthy enough to go to the celestial room in the temple, then you're well prepared for the celestial kingdom.
So that's why you say it takes the place of the cross.
It really does. It becomes one of the rungs on the ladder that is necessary to climb in order to receive exaltation.
Okay. Well, that it makes sense. That's why you'd have a picture of it in your home yeah, it'd be a big part of your life.
It is an
Okay.
integral part of LDS culture. When a new temple is opened anywhere within driving distance, many Mormons will travel there just to see the new temple, even if it's not open for temple work yet. They'll go there on a tour, sometimes with young children, to get them excited about future participation in the temple work. But then as soon as that temple is open, they're going to go back there again and do the baptisms for the dead and the sealings for the dead and the confirmations.
So I know you have used temple conversations when you've been witnessing. Can you tell us about those? How did you start them? What did you talk about?
Yeah, so my first few experiences at LDS temples, I think the thing that probably stuck out more than anything else was the Christians that were there, usually standing on the sidewalks, kind of outside of the temple grounds, yelling at the Mormons that were going in. I even got to see somebody dressed up in a Satan costume one time. Many of my LDS friends have told me about seeing people like that. And rather than trying to engage in meaningful conversations, they're shouting accusations, holding up signs that say, "Did you know Joseph Smith had many wives?" Really focused on like the dark underbelly of Mormonism. Mm-hmm. And as I observed that, I thought, is there perhaps a better way? And I think the better way is to go about those conversations in a way that is curious rather than confrontational. And about a year and a half ago, really had the first opportunity to go through a temple. A brand new temple was being opened in Pocatello, Idaho, and I took a group of Christians there that were interested in learning more about the temple and witnessing, and we went through the temple, and the tour itself was pretty short. They didn't let us stop and ask many questions. They kept saying, well, it's not secret, but it's sacred, so we need to be quiet and we need to move quickly. And when we got out, we had planned to spend a couple hours, and it took 20 minutes to go through. And the Christians that were with me said, "Hey, you said you like to witness to Mormons. Show us how." And I hadn't really been thinking about it, but what we really did is I said, well, a group of 10 or 12 is not going to be a great opportunity to strike up a conversation. So I took one or two with me at a time, and we just went up to people that were sitting outside. It was a really nice day. There were buses full of people coming in from all over the state to this open house. And the simple question we just asked, or we started by saying, "Hey, we're Christians. We're interested about what's going on in the temple. Can you tell us?" And they were more than willing to talk through with us about what the temple was all about. We learned much more from them about the temple than we did the tour guides. And then we just found opportunity to then say, "Oh, so that's what temples are about." And then I would transition and say, "Do you remember what temples and the tabernacle in the Bible was all about?" And that simple question, that transition, usually led to another half hour or hour-long conversation that was able to take place.
So did they typically know much about the Old Testament tabernacle?
Yeah, I would say they probably know or knew as much, if not more, than most Christians do, because they have this admiration for temples today. They at least understand a little bit about the Old Testament temple. But one of the things that they don't understand is that temple was so very different than this temple today. The thing that I really focus on when it comes to the Old Testament tabernacle and temple was that rather than it being a place where you come as a worthy person presenting your holiness to the Lord, the Old Testament tabernacle and temple was designed in such a way to say you are not holy, and therefore you cannot come into the presence of God. And what I'll often do is just kind of take them on a tour of the Old Testament tabernacle and temple and show them each piece as it was presented, first in Exodus 25 through 30 and then 35 through 40, and then in the book of Leviticus, exactly what that temple structure was all about.
So you made a fabulous temple tabernacle tour guide that is on the beperfect.org website that has a lovely little map and explanation for what a lot of the furniture and the articles inside of the tabernacle mean. So can you help us out, walk us through this and show us Christ in the tabernacle?
Yeah, no. So why did I spend time working on a tabernacle tour. I think it really started from that conversation. His name was Scott, was a guy that I met at the temple in Pocatello. And he was just so fascinated and so taken in when I opened up the book of Exodus on my phone and we just read through it together in the parking lot. And he just said, I didn't know all of these things. Thanks for sharing that. And then a few months later, we were down in the Salt Lake City area, and my family got to go on a Old Testament tabernacle tour at an LDS stake. They had brought in this replica of the Old Testament tabernacle, and they walked people through. And they had a little tour guide, but it was pretty simple. And I thought, what if we had something that Christians could use both at that touring tabernacle, but also to prepare them to witness at the temple? And so our team worked really hard to put this together. And as Molly said, it's available on the beyeperfect.org website. We'll link to that below. So what we really did is just tried to talk through what the tabernacle is, and then each of the articles of furniture, or each of the parts of the tabernacle, in a way that would say, here's what it is. This is what it meant to the people in the Old Testament. This is how it pointed to Christ, and then how you can use that to witness. I'm not going to walk through it in great depth right now because in the next couple of days, we're going to be releasing a video series that will turn this document, this PDF, into a visualization and a visual tour of the tabernacle. But Molly, what are some things that you want me to share today, knowing that that's coming, all of those pieces?
Well, you talked about how a lot of the tabernacle was meant to show us no admittance. You're not allowed. And that is like a foreign concept, an opposite concept for LDS, and even hard to swallow for us as Christians who may still have an ego. But teach us how come God would not allow everyone into the tabernacle, and why?
Yeah, he was really using the tabernacle as a teaching tool to demonstrate to his people, past and present, that you are sinful and I am a holy God. And because of your sin, you cannot come into my presence unless sacrifice, unless blood is shed. Life is in the blood in the Old Testament, one of the verses in Leviticus says. And what God was teaching his people is that the only way that you're going to be able to come into my presence is through death, through sacrifice, through atonement. Something happening so that you can come into my presence. And really the whole tabernacle and the whole temple structure, the way that it was set up, was to show that progressively less and less people could come into the most important parts in the temple. So there were certain places that really everybody could come, even Gentiles could come into an outer courtyard. But then it was very quickly from there that it was just the priest that was doing the work on the behalf of people. And it was really starting to show the necessity of a substitute who would do this work for you. So as soon as you come in the temple, there is the altar of sacrifice. They would bring animals, and the priest would slit its throat, put some of the blood on the altar, burn it up. And then there was a basin of bronze where the priest would wash his face and wash his hands in preparation for doing service for the people. So one really taught about that you need to be justified, and the other taught about that you needed to be sanctified.
And that altar of sacrifice, that was constantly in use, right?
Yeah.
Just picturing all the blood, sacrifice after sacrifice, and how that really would have emphasized death.
Yeah, and unholiness and the necessity for payment for sin. It does stand as a stark contrast to modern LDS temples that are pristine and polished and white, and there's no blood, there's no dirt. And that's something I'll often draw attention to is as soon as your family would walk in here, you would smell and see sacrifice taking place, and the necessity of it.
Which, of course, points us forward to the Lamb of God.
Absolutely. Yeah, so moving further into the temple, the priest would then go into the tabernacle or the temple proper. That was the holy place, and in the holy place was the lampstand, the table of presence, and the altar of incense. And each of those was another way of God showing his presence in the world and the way in which he would justify and sanctify people. And then there was a curtain that divided the holy place from the most holy place. Again, one more emphasis that you cannot come in because of your sin. And this is the place that I usually like to take people if I know I'm not going to have an hour or more to talk through the entirety of Exodus 25 through 40. If I want to just focus on one thing, that's the Day of Atonement.
Okay, so you just brought up the Day of Atonement. What happens on the Day of Atonement? What does that have to do with the curtain and what's behind the curtain?
Yeah, so on a regular basis, people would come to the temple in Jerusalem and offer sacrifices. There were daily sacrifices, weekly sacrifices, monthly sacrifices, seasonal sacrifices. And one of those sacrifices was the Great Day of Atonement, where on that day, the people from all over Israel were to gather to remember that God needed to do work for them. It was a day where they were told, you cannot do work. That's another thing that I'll emphasize is this modern temple, it's all about your work. The Old Testament temple was about work being done for you because you could not do it. That's one of those mind-blowing moments when people make that connection like, oh, the Old Testament was about work being done for me and showing me I can't do this. So they were told to not work on that day. They would bring with them animals that were to be sacrificed, some cow bulls and some goats that were to be sacrificed. And one of those goats you're probably familiar with because we talk about it in our modern English vernacular, the concept of the scapegoat.
Poor scapegoat.
Poor scapegoat. So the priest would sacrifice animals, sprinkle some blood on the people, some blood on himself. And one of those animals, the scapegoat, he would confess his sins on it and send it outside the city to say, God is done with your sin. He's removing it from you as far as the east is from the west. Beautiful picture there. But the place that I love to take my LDS friends and those at the temple is into the tabernacle itself. I'll talk through very quickly what happens at the ark, what happens at the basin of bronze where they're cleansing, how they would light the lampstand to show the light of God coming into the world in this world of darkness, the showbread table where God is infusing his holiness into this bread that was consumed by the priest as a way of God showing like you have to have me and my holiness in you in order to stand before me. They would light the altar of incense, and that smoke would go up and enter into the holy place in a sense, kind of covering over the holy presence of God so that they could come in. And once each year, on this Day of Atonement, the priest would bring with him some of the coals from that Ark of the Covenant in what was called a censer. It's this small object that he would hold those coals in, and he would bring it in, and he would sprinkle blood on it, and it would go up before God, and then he would bring a basin of blood with him, walk through the holy place, through the curtain, into the Holy of Holies, and this is where it gets really good. This is where he does something very striking, something that would make the participants in the modern LDS temple just squeamish. He takes that blood, and he walks over to the Ark of the Covenant, this beautiful Ark of the Covenant, that contains the budded staff of Aaron, and it contains some of the manna in a jar. And what most importantly is inside the Ark of the Covenant, Molly?
The law, the 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments. And this is the part where I often start to ask questions of the LDS folks, like, what was in this? And what was this all about? And then on top of it, what was called the mercy seat. There were 2 cherubim there, and this is where God dwelt in the temple here. And what the priest would do is he would take that blood and he would sprinkle and spill it on top of that Ark of the Covenant. And now God, instead of seeing the you shall and the you shall not of those 10 commandments that we ourselves could not fulfill, now sees blood of a sacrifice, blood that would fulfill the demands of the law in our place. And God sees substitution. And I use that then to say, fast forward hundreds of years to the time when once more God was showing through the temple, you are sinful, I am a holy God, and I'm going to make a way for you to come to me. And that's on the night that we call Good Friday, where that temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom, from God down to man, saying, now you can come in. Not because you've somehow done enough work to make yourself holy, but because the perfect Son of God lived and now has died in your place. The ultimate sacrificial lamb now allows you to come into the presence of God.
I really like how you emphasize the presence of God there at the end, and that it's not just about Jesus gives you the opportunity to work your way into the presence of God, but gives you the presence of God.
Absolutely. And it's a confidence that we have right now, where on this very day, those who place their trust not in themselves, but in the perfect work of Jesus, don't have to be afraid to stand in the presence of God right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I love the idea of just talking about how I am confident that I will be in the presence of God because of this right here, because Jesus poured his blood over the law for me, and that temple curtain between me and God was ripped apart. So I'm confident I'll be there.
Yeah, all of the works and all of the ordinances that needed to take place, God did for us.
So can you help me think of practical ways to use this for witnessing? I need to simplify it because I don't always hang out at the temple.
You don't?
Conversation starters.
Yeah. So I would encourage all of those listening at some point, go on a temple tour, and then go and spend time on the temple grounds. Don't take a large group with you. Don't make a scene. Don't carry
witnessing.
Yeah, don't mob witness. Don't take big signs and banners. Again, I'll emphasize this one more time. Take the curious rather than confrontational approach. Just a few weeks ago, I was down in Gilbert and Mesa, Arizona with a group of college students, and we did a lot of at-the-door witnessing, but we also did a lot of at-the-temple witnessing. And it was really awesome to just in almost like a proud fatherly moment, walk around and see all of these students engaged in real meaningful conversations. We had walked through this tabernacle tour guide document as part of our training, and so they were well prepared to ask questions first about the LDS temple, but then say, hey, can I share with you about the temple in the Bible? And they loved talking about the Day of Atonement with those LDS members. Molly, you mentioned earlier that in the homes of your friends, you've seen the temple on their wall. Mm-hmm. Use that as an opportunity to strike up a conversation. Say, hey, so every time I walk in here, I see this
Everybody's got a temple.
photo. Tell me about the temple. And you can use that multiple times with multiple friends. Just
Why is it important to you?
Get that conversation going.
Well, and a lot of times jewelry, like I've seen rings that have usually the CTR, choose the right, and then a little tiny temple.
Yeah.
So I guess looking for little conversation pieces. What is that? Pointing to a temple. Why is that so important to you? I like to wear a cross. Why do you wear a temple?
Yeah, I think it just, when you start to look for visual opportunities to engage in conversation, you'll see more and more of them.
I really like the curious, not confrontational approach, because that's a really easy starting place for me, is just to ask questions. And it's a way to be kind and respectful. And that kind of gives you the opportunity to talk about what's important to you and why.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, I don't think you're going to want to or be able to spend too much time on temple grounds. Even the afternoons that we spent there, we realized that, it became pretty obvious within a couple of hours that we were trying to strike up conversations. And then the next day we went to a different temple in the area. So it's not something that I think you're going to be able to do every day. You might get chased away eventually, but go back and try it again with another group of people.
I suppose missionary conversations, too, would be pretty easy to ask about the temples.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd encourage you to, again, check that document and the videos out on the Be Perfect website. You could even share those videos with your LDS friends and ask them to respond to it.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for the education.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Blessings to all of you who are witnessing, and God be with you.
Have a blessed day. joining us for this episode of Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a Truth in Love Ministry podcast. For more resources, visit tilm.org. If this podcast and other Truth in Love Ministry resources have been a blessing to you, consider supporting the mission to proclaim Christ to Mormons and empower Christians to witness by visiting tilm.org/